My name is Dr. Amelia Rowan, and I'm 33 years old. 3 years ago, my family signed the papers that declared me dead after a catastrophic highway accident. They mourned me, held a funeral, and moved on, believing the doctors had done everything they could. But I survived. While I fought my way back from memory loss and months of rehabilitation under a different identity, my family made another decision they believed was an act of love. They donated my heart. Last winter, during an emergency transplant complication at St. Vincent Medical Center in Portland, I walked into an operating room and discovered something impossible. The patient on the table was my older sister, and the heart beating inside her chest was legally taken from the woman my family believed I used to be. The first time I heard my own name spoken like it belonged to a ghost, I didn't recognize it. Amelia Rowan, the nurse said gently, testing the sound as if unsure it should still exist. I stared at her from the hospital bed, confused by the emotion in her voice. Machines hummed around me, steady and unfamiliar. The ceiling lights were too bright. The air smelled sharply of antiseptic, and every part of my body felt heavy. Not painful exactly, just distant, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't remember who Amelia Rowan was. The accident had happened somewhere along Interstate 84 during a winter storm. A chain collision, ice, headlights disappearing into white fog. That was what doctors later told me. The bus I'd been traveling on lost control, sliding into oncoming traffic before everything turned into metal and silence. For weeks afterward, I existed between consciousness and nothingness. When I finally woke fully, memory refused to follow. No childhood, no family, no past. Just fragments, flashes of color, the faint impression of laughter, and an overwhelming feeling that I had once been loved by people whose faces I could no longer see. The hospital listed me as Jane Doe for nearly 2 months. My identification had been lost in the crash. Facial swelling made recognition impossible. By the time investigators matched dental records, something irreversible had already happened outside those hospital walls. My family had buried me. I learned that slowly, in pieces doctors hesitated to share. The official report declared multiple fatalities at the crash site. One body, burned beyond recognition, had been identified using belongings assumed to be mine. My parents were notified. A funeral was held. Insurance paperwork completed. My life, legally and emotionally, had ended. And while they mourned me, I was learning how to walk again. Rehabilitation became my entire world. Physical therapy in the mornings, cognitive testing in the afternoons. I relearned simple things: balance, handwriting, even how to trust my own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Faint scars along my hairline, a thin white line near my collarbone, eyes that carried exhaustion deeper than my age should allow. Doctors explained the memory loss carefully. Your brain protected itself, one neurologist said. Memories may return gradually, or not at all. At the time, that felt merciful, because grief without context is easier to carry. Months passed before fragments began surfacing, sensations rather than stories. The smell of coffee triggering sudden sadness, the sound of distant laughter causing an ache I couldn't explain. Dreams filled with a house I almost recognized but could never fully see. One evening, during occupational therapy, a social worker sat beside me holding a folder. "There's something you should know," she said gently. Inside were newspaper clippings, photos of a memorial service, candles, flowers, a framed picture of a young woman smiling confidently at the camera. Me. I stared at the image for a long time, waiting for recognition to spark. Nothing came. "They believed you died," she continued softly. "Your family grieved. No one knew you survived." Family. The word felt foreign and heavy at the same time. "Did they love her?" I asked quietly. The social worker hesitated before answering. "Yes," she said, "very much." That should have comforted me. Instead, it left an emptiness I couldn't explain, like standing outside a home you once belonged to, but no longer had the key to enter. Because somewhere, People were living their lives believing I no longer existed, and I didn't know whether I wanted to return to them or remain the stranger I had become. When my discharge finally came, the hospital arranged temporary housing and a new identification under supervised recovery status. Without clear memory or stable emotional grounding, doctors recommended rebuilding slowly before attempting contact with my past. So I did. I learned who I was by choosing rather than remembering. I took classes again, volunteered at clinics, rediscovered an instinctive calm around medical environments that surprised even me. Healing others felt natural, as if some part of my old self still lived beneath the missing pieces. Years passed quietly like that, until the winter morning everything changed. Because the life my family thought they had buried was about to walk back into their world. And the truth waiting there was far more complicated than survival. It was already beating, steadily, impossibly, inside someone they loved. Recovery didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small victories no one else would have noticed. Tying my shoes without losing balance, remembering directions without writing them down, finishing a full conversation without the fog creeping back into my thoughts. Doctors called it progress. To me, it felt like assembling a stranger piece by piece. Without memories anchoring me, the future became easier than the past. The hospital helped me establish a temporary identity, while legal complications surrounding my presumed death were reviewed. Until everything could be resolved, I lived under supervised documentation as Amelia R. Hale, a variation close enough to my original records to avoid confusion, but distant enough to give me space. It felt strange choosing parts of myself intentionally. What kind of person was I before? Was I kind? Difficult? Forgettable? No one could answer. So I began building someone new. I rented a small apartment in Portland, close to the rehabilitation center. The city felt forgiving. Rain softening edges, strangers polite enough not to ask questions. No one there knew I had once been mourned, once existed in another life entirely. I enrolled in prerequisite science courses again after therapists noticed how naturally I gravitated toward medical material. Anatomy diagrams felt familiar. Medical terminology surfaced instinctively, as if memory lived somewhere deeper than conscious thought. One professor stopped me after class one evening. "You've done this before," he said casually. I froze. "Maybe?" I answered carefully. The truth was unsettling. My hands remembered things my mind did not. Soon I began volunteering at a community clinic, assisting nurses with intake paperwork and patient preparation. The environment calmed me. Chaos didn't overwhelm me. It sharpened my focus. Patients trusted me easily, and I couldn't explain why. It was as if a former version of myself still guided my instincts. Sometimes, late at night, fragments returned. A kitchen filled with sunlight. A woman laughing somewhere behind me. A voice calling my name. Not Amelia, but something softer. Each memory dissolved before I could hold it. I stopped chasing them. Healing required forward motion, not excavation. 2 years passed quietly. I completed additional coursework and applied to finish medical training under special review. The approval process was complicated, but doctors who had followed my recovery advocated strongly on my behalf. They believed returning to medicine would stabilize me emotionally. They were right. The more responsibility I gained, the more whole I felt. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything shifted. I was helping prepare discharge paperwork when a television mounted in the clinic waiting area began broadcasting a local news segment. Normally, I ignored background noise, but a familiar last name caught my attention. Rowan. My hands stopped moving. The screen showed a charity gala in Seattle honoring organ donation awareness. Cameras flashed as families shared stories about loved ones lost and lives saved through transplantation. A woman stepped forward to speak. Elegant, confident, smiling through emotion. The caption beneath her image read, "Lillian Rowan, heart transplant recipient." Something inside my chest tightened painfully. I didn't recognize her face consciously, yet my body reacted before thought formed. My pulse raced. Breath shortened. A deep, instinctive grief rose without explanation. The reporter continued speaking. 3 years ago, Lillian Rowan received a life-saving heart donation following a tragic highway accident that claimed her younger sister's life. The room tilted. Younger sister. I gripped the counter to stay upright as fragments slammed together. Flashes of laughter, shared childhood arguments, warmth that felt painfully familiar. Her sister. Me. The broadcast continued, showing my parents standing beside her, older but unmistakable. My mother wiped tears while describing loss turning into hope. My father spoke about honoring sacrifice through survival. They looked healed, whole, as if grief had eventually settled into acceptance. I watched silently until the segment ended, the television returning to commercials as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. Because for the first time since waking from the accident, I understood something terrifying. My family believed my death had saved my sister, and somewhere inside her chest, a donated heartbeat because of a decision made after they said goodbye to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Questions circled endlessly. Had they known? Had they chosen? Did they ever imagine I might still be alive? I told myself it didn't matter. I had a new life now, a new name, a future built carefully from nothing. But deep down, something had already begun pulling me backward, toward a truth waiting patiently, one that would soon force me to confront a past neither of us were prepared to face. Sometimes a story feels finished, until one detail makes you realize you are only standing at the beginning. And if you've ever felt that quiet pull to keep listening, you already know why some journeys refuse to let you go. I told myself not to search for them. For 3 days after seeing the broadcast, I avoided the internet entirely. I worked longer shifts at the clinic, volunteered for extra hours, and filled every quiet moment with tasks that required concentration. If I stayed busy enough, maybe the unease crawling beneath my skin would fade. It didn't. Curiosity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a steady pressure, persistent, patient, until ignoring it becomes harder than facing the truth. On the fourth night, I opened my laptop. Typing Rowan into the search bar felt strangely intimate, like trespassing into someone else's memories. Hundreds of results appeared instantly: charity articles, social media posts, fundraising campaigns connected to organ donation awareness, and photos. So many photos. My parents stood beside a woman I now understood was my older sister, Lillian. She looked healthy, radiant even, one hand often resting unconsciously against her chest, as if aware of the miracle inside her, inside my chest. The thought arrived before logic could stop it. I read every article carefully. 3 years earlier, Lillian had suffered sudden heart failure caused by a rare genetic condition. She had been placed on an emergency transplant list with only days left to live. Then, almost impossibly, a donor heart became available following a fatal highway accident. The donor remained anonymous, but the timeline matched perfectly. Same highway, same storm, same night I disappeared. My hands trembled as realization settled fully into place. Legally, medically, emotionally, my family believed my death had saved her life. I leaned back slowly, trying to breathe through the confusion. Doctors must have recovered organs from the body identified as mine. Paperwork signed. Consent given by next of kin, my parents. They hadn't chosen between daughters. They had believed they were honoring one by saving the other. And somehow that truth hurt more than betrayal would have. Because love had still been there, just directed toward a version of reality that no longer existed. I closed the laptop, but sleep didn't come that night. Fragments of memory pressed closer now, sharpened by context. A shared bedroom. Lillian teasing me about studying too much. My mother calling us both downstairs for dinner. My father laughing at something I couldn't quite hear. They weren't strangers. They were mine. Yet I felt like an outsider watching someone else's childhood unfold. The next morning at the clinic, I struggled to focus. Simple tasks required effort. Every heartbeat I heard through a stethoscope felt different now, louder, heavier. During lunch break, I sat alone reviewing transplant protocols on my phone. One detail stopped me cold. Recipients often required lifelong monitoring for complications, rejection episodes, vascular damage, sudden instability years after surgery, meaning someday, Lillian might return to a hospital in crisis. And if that happened, a doctor would stand beside her bed unaware of the full story. The thought unsettled me deeply. For the first time, curiosity shifted into responsibility. I wasn't just connected emotionally anymore. Medicine had tied our lives together permanently. The survival of one sister depended on a decision made when the other was believed gone. That evening, while organizing patient charts, a senior nurse approached me. "You look distracted," she said gently. "Just tired," I answered automatically. She studied me for a moment before nodding. Sometimes the past catches up faster than we expect. The words lingered long after she walked away, because something inside me knew this wasn't coincidence. The accident, the transplant, the sudden resurfacing of memories. It felt less like chance and more like a story unfinished. Weeks passed, but the feeling didn't fade. Then, one rainy January morning, while assisting in the emergency department during clinical rotation, an announcement echoed through the hospital speakers. "Cardiac emergency inbound, transplant patient, severe complications." The room shifted instantly into motion. Doctors rushed to prepare equipment, nurses cleared space, monitors powered on. I grabbed a chart automatically as the incoming patient file loaded onto the screen. The name appeared slowly. Lillian Rowan. My breath stopped. Outside, ambulance sirens grew louder. And for the first time since waking from the accident, I understood with terrifying clarity that the past hadn't simply returned. It had found me. And within minutes, I would be standing face to face with the life my family believed I had given away forever. The emergency department transformed within seconds. Monitors flickered to life. Nurses moved with practiced urgency, clearing pathways while residents reviewed transplant protocols aloud. Cardiac complications were unpredictable, especially years after surgery, and every second mattered. I stood frozen for half a heartbeat, staring at the name glowing on the intake screen. Lillian Rowan, my sister. The word felt both certain and impossible. "Amelia," a resident called, pulling me back into motion. "We need another set of hands." Training overrode shock. I grabbed gloves, forcing my breathing into rhythm as the ambulance doors burst open. Paramedics rushed inside, voices overlapping with clinical precision. Female, mid-30s, transplant recipient, sudden collapse at home, severe arrhythmia, blood pressure unstable. The stretcher rolled past me, and there she was. Lillian looked different from the woman on television. Paler, fragile beneath harsh hospital lights. Oxygen fogged her mask with shallow breaths. Dark hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. One hand lay loosely at her side, fingers twitching slightly as if searching for something familiar. A faint surgical scar curved along her chest. My chest tightened instinctively. That scar marked the place where a heart once meant for me now kept her alive. "Move," the attending physician ordered gently, guiding the team into position. I stepped forward automatically, helping transfer her onto the trauma bed. My hands brushed her arm for a fraction of a second. A sudden flash struck my mind. Two girls running through sprinklers, laughter echoing across a backyard. A voice shouting, "Amelia, wait up!" The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving my pulse racing. Focus. Vitals scrolled across the monitor, dangerously unstable. "She's going into ventricular tachycardia," someone said. Medication was prepared immediately, defibrillator pads placed. The room tightened around urgency. I forced myself to see only a patient, not a sister, not a past. Just physiology. Shock delivered. Her body jolted sharply. The monitor hesitated, then stabilized into a fragile rhythm. A collective breath released across the room. "She's holding," the attending confirmed. "Prep for ICU transfer." Relief washed through me so suddenly my knees nearly weakened. Alive. Again. As the team stabilized her, movement near the entrance caught my attention. Two figures rushed through the sliding doors, panic written across their faces. My parents. Time folded inward. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, hair streaked with gray, eyes wide with fear. My father followed closely behind, shoulders tense, scanning the room desperately. "That's our daughter," he said urgently to a nurse. "Is she okay? Please, we need to see her." His voice was older, heavier, but unmistakable. I turned away instinctively, heart pounding louder than any monitor. They stood only a few feet away. 5 years of absence collapsed into a single moment. Yet they didn't recognize me. To them, I was just another clinician moving efficiently around their child. A stranger. The nurse guided them toward the waiting area while explaining procedures. My mother kept looking back toward the bed, whispering prayers under her breath. "She can't die," she said. "Not after everything." The words landed harder than expected. Not after everything. I wondered if they ever thought about the daughter they had already lost. ICU staff arrived to transport Lillian upstairs. I walked alongside the gurney, checking monitors automatically, my movements steady despite the storm inside me. As elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of my parents standing together. Frightened, helpless, completely unaware that the person helping save their daughter was the same one they had buried years ago. The realization settled heavily. They had mourned me. They had survived without me. And now fate had placed me back into their lives without warning, without preparation, without permission. The elevator doors opened onto the intensive care floor. Doctors prepared for further testing while I stepped back, suddenly unsure where I belonged. Was I Amelia Rowan, the daughter who had died? Or Amelia Hale, the woman who survived? Before I could answer, the attending physician turned toward me. "You assisted well," he said. "Stay close. Transplant patients can crash again." I nodded automatically, because leaving wasn't an option anymore. Not when the heartbeat connecting us both was fighting to survive only a few feet away. And somewhere deep inside, I understood this was only the beginning. Sooner or later, truth would demand recognition. And when it did, none of us would be able to return to the lives we had before. The ICU felt quieter than the emergency department, but the silence carried more weight. Machines replaced urgency with rhythm, steady beeps marking seconds that suddenly felt fragile. Lillian lay unconscious beneath soft fluorescent light, her breathing supported, monitors tracing the delicate balance keeping her alive. I stood near the foot of the bed reviewing charts I barely needed to read. Dilated cardiomyopathy complications, possible transplant rejection, electrical instability. Nothing unusual medically, except that every clinical detail felt personal in a way I couldn't allow myself to acknowledge. Her heart rate stabilized gradually. "My heart," I corrected silently. "Number, not mine anymore." Across the room, a nurse adjusted medication levels and glanced at me. "Family's waiting outside," she said quietly. "They've been asking for updates every 5 minutes." I nodded without responding. I knew they were there. Even without seeing them, I could feel their presence, like gravity pulling at memories I still couldn't fully access. A sudden movement drew my attention. Lillian's fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered faintly. "She's waking," the nurse said, stepping closer. I moved instinctively to the bedside. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, scanning unfamiliar shapes. Confusion crossed her face before pain followed. "You're in the hospital," I said gently, professional instinct guiding my tone. "You had a cardiac episode. Try not to move." Her gaze shifted toward me. For a long second, she simply stared. Something passed through her expression, not recognition exactly, but hesitation, as if my face triggered a memory just out of reach. She whispered weakly. The sound froze me. I leaned closer automatically. "Don't talk yet." But her eyes stayed fixed on mine. "Amelia?" she breathed. The room seemed to tilt. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't even awareness. Just a reflex. A name surfacing from somewhere deeper than consciousness. The nurse looked between us, confused. I stepped back immediately, forcing calm into my voice. "You're disoriented. That's normal after an arrhythmia." Lillian blinked slowly, exhaustion pulling her under again as sedation eased her back into sleep. My hands trembled once I turned away. Outside the room, the ICU hallway stretched endlessly. I barely reached the nurse's station before stopping, gripping the counter to steady myself. She had said my name, not Amelia Hale, Amelia Rowan. Memory lived somewhere inside her body, too. Before I could collect myself, the ICU doors opened. My parents entered cautiously, guided by staff. They looked older up close, grief and years etched into their faces. My mother clutched her purse tightly, eyes searching desperately for reassurance. My father carried that same controlled tension I remembered from childhood, trying to appear strong while fear slipped through the cracks. Neither recognized me. Of course they didn't. The woman they buried existed only in photographs. "Doctor," my father said, approaching carefully, "is she going to be okay?" His voice struck something deep inside me. I answered automatically, "She's stable for now. We're monitoring her heart closely." My mother exhaled shakily, tears forming immediately. "Thank you. Thank you for helping her." Gratitude, directed at me. The irony pressed painfully against my ribs. They stood only inches away, searching my face for comfort, without realizing they had once known every expression I could make. My father nodded respectfully. "We almost lost her once already. We can't go through that again." The words lingered heavily. Almost lost her once. I wondered if they ever thought about the daughter they believed they had already lost completely. Before leaving, my mother hesitated. "What's your name, doctor?" she asked softly. Time slowed. For a brief moment, truth hovered dangerously close. I swallowed carefully. "Dr. Hale," I said. The lie settled between us quietly. She smiled gratefully, unaware of what it cost me to say it. After they walked into Lillian's room, I remained alone in the hallway, listening faintly to their voices. Familiar tones filled with worry, love, relief. They sounded like a family healing together, and I stood outside it. That night, I sat alone in the staff lounge long after my shift ended, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I had built a new life carefully, piece by piece. But now the past wasn't just memory. It was alive, breathing, and beating steadily inside someone I loved. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't being forgotten. It's standing close enough to be seen and choosing silence anyway. And if you've stayed this far, you already know the moment of recognition is coming. Sleep didn't come easily after that shift. I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the apartment heater, watching shadows move slowly across the ceiling while one thought repeated endlessly in my mind. She said my name. Not clearly, not consciously. But something inside Lillian had recognized me before logic could interfere. Memory lived deeper than reason, in voice tones, expressions, instincts the brain couldn't fully erase. And if she felt it, what would happen when she saw me again fully awake? The next morning, rain covered Portland in a gray mist that blurred the edges of buildings. I arrived at the hospital early, hoping routine would steady me. Medicine had always been predictable. Protocols existed. Decisions followed structure. Families did not. Lillian's chart showed improvement overnight. Heart rhythm stable, medication adjustments working. The transplant team planned additional imaging later that afternoon. Professional relief came first. Personal fear followed immediately after. I paused outside her ICU room longer than necessary before stepping inside. She was awake this time. Color had returned faintly to her face, though exhaustion lingered beneath her eyes. She turned toward the sound of the door opening, studying me carefully. Not like a patient looking at a stranger, but like someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Good morning," I said gently, keeping my voice neutral. Her gaze didn't leave mine. "I know you," she said quietly. The words landed softly but carried weight. "You're experiencing memory overlap," I explained calmly. "That's common after cardiac events." She frowned slightly. "No, not like that." Her hand moved weakly toward her chest, fingers resting above the surgical scar. "Every time you walk in," she continued slowly, "my heart feels different." The sentence stole my breath. I focused on adjusting her monitor instead of answering. "Vitals normal, oxygen stable." Safe territory. You've been through a traumatic experience, I said carefully. Your body is reacting to stress. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Some connections exist beyond explanation. Before she could respond, the door opened again. My parents entered. The air shifted instantly. My mother smiled with visible relief seeing Lillian awake, rushing to her side. My father followed more slowly, shoulders relaxing for the first time since her admission. "How are you feeling?" my mother asked, brushing hair gently from Lillian's forehead. "Tired," she whispered. Then her eyes flicked toward me again. "Mom," she said softly, "this doctor." My pulse spiked. My mother turned gratefully toward me. "Dr. Hale has been wonderful," she said. "She helped save you." Save you. The phrase echoed strangely. Lillian watched me carefully, confusion deepening. "Have we met before?" she asked. I held her gaze for a second longer than I should have. "No," I answered quietly. The lie felt heavier this time. My father thanked me again, shaking my hand firmly, a gesture so familiar it sent a sudden flash through my mind. A younger version of him teaching me how to ride a bicycle. His hand steady at my back, his voice saying, "I've got you." The memory vanished before I could hold it. I stepped away quickly, pretending to review notes. Professional distance. Necessary distance. Because recognition wasn't just emotional. It carried consequences. Legal records declared Amelia Rowan deceased. Insurance settlements finalized. Organ donation completed under lawful consent. If truth surfaced suddenly, it wouldn't just heal wounds. It would reopen everything. After finishing my assessment, I left the room, closing the door softly behind me. In the hallway, I exhaled slowly, tension finally escaping. The situation was becoming impossible to contain. Lillian sensed something. My parents trusted me unknowingly. And every passing hour increased the chance that memory, hers or mine, would connect the final pieces. For the first time since the accident, fear outweighed curiosity. Because once truth emerged, none of us would be able to return to the lives we had built to survive loss. And deep down, I wasn't sure which outcome terrified me more, being recognized, or realizing they had learned to live peacefully without me. The change began quietly. No alarms, no sudden crisis. Just a subtle shift in the atmosphere around Lillian's room, the kind experienced medical staff notice before charts confirm it. Her vitals remained stable, but something else had awakened beneath the surface. Awareness. I sensed it the moment I stepped inside that afternoon. She was sitting slightly upright, supported by pillows, sunlight filtering through the blinds across her face. Her eyes followed me immediately, sharper now, less clouded by medication. "Waiting. Your tests look good," I said, keeping my tone professional while reviewing her chart. "The transplant team is optimistic." She didn't respond. Instead, she watched me with unsettling intensity. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course." Her fingers moved again toward the scar on her chest. "Did you ever lose someone?" she asked slowly, "and then feel like they never actually left?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Why do you ask?" "Because every time you speak," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I hear my sister." The room felt suddenly too small. I focused on the monitor beside her bed, pretending to check numbers already memorized. "That's a normal emotional response," I said carefully. "Trauma can—" "No," she interrupted softly, her eyes filled with tears, confusion replacing certainty. "She died 3 years ago," Lillian continued. "But sometimes I dream about her standing just out of reach. I can never see her face clearly." My throat tightened. Fragments stirred violently in my own mind. Shared birthdays, whispered conversations late at night, arguments that ended in laughter. Memories pushing forward faster now, as if proximity had unlocked something buried. Before I could answer, the door opened. My parents entered carrying coffee cups and cautious smiles. They paused when they noticed Lillian crying. "What's wrong?" my mother asked immediately. Lillian wiped her eyes. "Nothing, just emotional." My father turned toward me. "Is everything okay medically?" "Yes," I said, Recovery is progressing well. He nodded, relieved. Then Lillian spoke again. Mom, she said quietly, do you ever feel like Amelia isn't really gone? The name hit the room like a dropped glass. My mother froze. My father looked away instinctively, grief flickering across his face even after all this time. We talk about her every day, my mother whispered. But you need to rest. Lillian shook her head slightly. No, I mean right now. Like she's close. Her eyes moved back to me. Recognition hovered dangerously near. My pulse pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. A sudden rush of memory flooded me without warning. Standing beside Lillian at a school play. Her squeezing my hand before going on stage. Her whispering, "Don't leave before I finish, okay?" The past slammed into the present with breathtaking clarity. I staggered back slightly, gripping the counter. "Doctor?" my father asked, concerned. "I'm fine," I said quickly. But I wasn't. For the first time since the accident, I remembered fully. Not fragments. Everything. My childhood. My family. The night of the crash. The life I had lost and rebuilt under another name. I was Amelia Rowan, and I was standing 3 feet away from the people who had buried me. The realization stole the air from my lungs. Lillian watched me closely, tears falling freely now. "It's your eyes," she whispered. "That's why I couldn't stop looking at you." My mother turned toward me slowly, confusion forming. I stepped back toward the door. "I need to check another patient," I said, voice unsteady despite my effort to remain calm. No one stopped me. I walked into the hallway, each step heavier than the last. Memory returning should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. Because now I knew the truth completely. They hadn't abandoned me. They had mourned me. And the life keeping my sister alive existed because they believed letting me go was the only way to save her. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Recognition was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. And when it happened, none of us would escape the consequences of a miracle built on a mistake. I stayed in the hallway longer than I meant to. The noise of the ICU faded into a distant hum while memories settled back into place. Not as fragments anymore, but as a complete life returning all at once. Childhood birthdays, arguments over borrowed clothes, my father teaching me to drive, my mother braiding my hair before school. Every piece fit again, and with memory came clarity. They hadn't chosen to lose me. They had believed they already had. That realization changed everything, and made what came next infinitely harder. I knew I couldn't keep pretending to be Dr. Hale much longer. Lillian already sensed the truth. Another conversation, another glance held too long, and recognition would arrive on its own. But truth spoken too suddenly could destroy more than silence ever had. I took a slow breath and walked back toward her room. Inside, my parents sat quietly beside the bed, while Lillian watched the doorway as if expecting me. The moment I entered, all 3 of them turned toward me at once. The air felt charged. My mother smiled politely. "Doctor, she's been asking for you." Of course she had. I stepped closer, forcing calm into my movements. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better?" Lillian said softly. Her eyes never left mine. "Clearer." My father stood, stretching stiffly. "We were just talking about going home once she's discharged." Home. The word landed differently now that I remembered exactly what it meant. Lillian swallowed slowly before speaking again. "Can everyone stay?" she asked. Something in her tone made my parents exchange a glance. I felt it too. The shift from medical conversation into something deeply personal. "Yes," my mother said gently, sitting back down. Lillian turned fully toward me. "I keep remembering things when you're here," she said. "Little moments. Sounds. The way someone used to laugh." My chest tightened. "I think," she continued carefully, "my body knows something my mind is still catching up to." The room went quiet. I realized there was no safe way forward anymore. Only honesty, however incomplete. I pulled a chair closer to the bed. "There are times after trauma," I began slowly, choosing each word carefully, "when memory and emotion reconnect before logic does." My father nodded politely, assuming explanation. But Lillian shook her head. "No," she whispered. "This isn't medical. Her gaze softened, searching my face. "You look at Mom the same way Amelia did when she was worried," she said. "You tilt your head exactly like her." My mother's smile faded slightly. I felt my pulse rising. "I think," Lillian said, voice trembling now, "you remind me of her because part of me never stopped expecting her to walk back through the door." The words broke something open inside me. My parents lowered their eyes, grief resurfacing quietly. I could see it clearly now. They had built their healing around loss, around believing goodbye had been final. Truth wouldn't simply restore joy. It would reopen years of mourning. I wasn't ready to shatter them yet, so I stood slowly. "Recovery can bring intense emotions," I said gently. "You've been through something life-threatening." It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Lillian watched me carefully, disappointment flickering across her face as if she sensed I was retreating again. Before leaving, I paused beside her bed. Her heart monitor beeped steadily. Strong, resilient, alive. Because of decisions none of us had fully understood at the time. As I turned toward the door, my mother spoke softly behind me. "Doctor, have we met somewhere before?" The question stopped me. I didn't turn immediately. For one fragile second, I considered answering honestly, ending the uncertainty, allowing shock to replace confusion. But fear held me still. Not fear of rejection. Fear of breaking something already barely healed. "No," I said quietly, and walked out. In the hallway, guilt followed close behind. Because the truth was no longer hidden by circumstance. It was hidden by choice. And every hour I delayed, recognition grew stronger, like a story demanding its ending whether I was ready or not. Soon, silence would no longer be possible. And when the truth finally entered that room, it wouldn't arrive gently. It would change all of us forever. I avoided Lillian's room for the rest of that evening. Not completely. I reviewed her charts, monitored updates, and checked vitals remotely. But I asked another physician to handle direct bedside evaluations whenever possible. Distance felt safer, professional, necessary. It didn't work, because truth has a way of closing distance on its own. Near midnight, my pager vibrated sharply. "ICU, room 412, cardiac instability." My body reacted before thought could interfere. I was already moving down the hallway, adrenaline replacing hesitation. Medical instinct erased emotional conflict as I pushed through the ICU doors. Inside, alarms sounded urgently. Lillian's heart rhythm spiked erratically across the monitor. "She's in atrial flutter," a nurse reported. "Rate climbing fast." I stepped forward automatically, issuing orders with steady precision. "Prepare medication, increase oxygen. Stay with me, Lillian." Her eyes opened weakly at the sound of my voice. Fear filled them, but also recognition. She grabbed my wrist suddenly, surprising both of us with the strength behind it. "Don't go," she whispered. "I'm right here," I said calmly. Medication entered her IV. The monitor hesitated, numbers fluctuating dangerously before slowly stabilizing. The alarms quieted. Relief swept through the room. But Lillian didn't release my wrist. Instead, she stared at me intensely, breathing unevenly. "I know you," she said again, louder this time. My parents rushed in moments later, drawn by the alarms. My mother's face drained of color seeing the monitors, while my father hovered helplessly near the foot of the bed. "What happened?" he asked urgently. "She's stabilizing," I answered. Lillian's grip tightened. "No," she said, voice trembling. "Stop pretending." The room fell silent. Her eyes moved between my parents and me. "It's her," she whispered. My mother frowned, confused. "Honey, you're exhausted." "It's Amelia." The name echoed through the room like thunder. Time stopped. My father stared at me, confusion shifting slowly into disbelief. My mother shook her head instinctively, rejecting the possibility before logic could catch up. "That's impossible," she said softly. "Amelia." Her voice broke before finishing the sentence. I felt every heartbeat in the room. Hers, mine, the one connecting us both. There was no safe way to deny it anymore. I removed my hand gently from Lillian's grasp and stepped back, forcing myself to breathe. "I didn't remember at first," I said quietly. My voice sounded unfamiliar even to me. The words hung suspended before meaning reached them. My mother's knees nearly gave out as she grabbed the bed rail. My father stared as if trying to reconcile two realities at once, the daughter buried years ago and the doctor standing in front of him. "No," he whispered. We we buried you." "I survived," I said. The truth felt strangely calm once spoken aloud. Shock moved across their faces in waves. Disbelief, hope, fear, guilt colliding all at once. My mother stepped forward slowly, hands trembling. "Amelia?" she asked, barely breathing the name. I nodded. She covered her mouth as a sob escaped before she could stop it. My father didn't move. His eyes filled slowly, years of grief unraveling in seconds. "How?" he began, but the question collapsed under its own weight. Lillian watched us all, tears streaming down her face. "I knew," she whispered. My heart knew. No one spoke after that. Machines continued their steady rhythm, grounding us in reality while everything else shifted. I realized then that recognition didn't feel like triumph. It felt like standing inside an earthquake, relief and devastation existing together. Because truth hadn't simply reunited us. It had reopened loss. They hadn't lost one daughter. They had nearly lost both. And now we were all forced to face a miracle none of us understood how to live with. Outside the ICU windows, night slowly gave way to morning. Inside, our lives began again. Not where they ended, but somewhere entirely new, uncertain, and fragile. And for the first time since the accident, we were finally standing in the same truth together. The first minutes after the truth came out felt unreal. No one moved. No one knew how to move. My mother cried quietly beside Lillian's bed, one hand gripping hers while the other covered her mouth as if afraid the moment might disappear if she breathed too loudly. My father stood frozen near the window, staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, relief tangled with guilt so deep it seemed to age him instantly. And I stood between them, unsure where I belonged, alive, but not the same daughter they had lost. Doctors eventually returned, gently guiding conversation back toward medicine. Lillian needed rest. Emotional stress could trigger another cardiac episode. The moment fractured into practical instructions and quiet departures. Reality always returns through routine. I left the room first, not because I wanted distance, because I needed air. The hallway felt different now. Nurses who had known me as Dr. Hale glanced at me with curiosity after hearing fragments of conversation spreading quietly through staff. Hospitals carry stories quickly, but no one asked questions. Professional respect created a protective silence. A few minutes later, my father found me near the windows overlooking the parking lot. He stopped several feet away, as if unsure how close he was allowed to stand. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. For most of my life, my father always had answers. Hearing uncertainty in his voice felt more powerful than any apology. "You don't have to say anything yet," I replied gently. He nodded, swallowing hard. "We thought we lost you." "I know. We held a funeral," he whispered. "Your mother picked the music. I gave a speech. I kept thinking I should have protected you somehow." His voice broke. The grief was real. That mattered more than explanations. A moment later, my mother joined us. Her eyes were red, but her expression carried something softer now. Cautious hope mixed with fear of rejection. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. I need to know you're really here." I hesitated before stepping closer. "I'm here," I said. She reached out slowly, stopping halfway as if waiting for permission. This time, I didn't step back. Her arms wrapped around me carefully, trembling, as though afraid I might disappear again. The embrace felt unfamiliar at first. Years of distance couldn't vanish instantly. But warmth followed gradually, memory reconnecting emotion to touch. Behind us, Lillian watched from her doorway, supported by a nurse. She smiled through tears. Later that week, after discharge planning began, we sat together for the first time outside a hospital room, in a small cafe across the street. Conversation moved awkwardly at first. They asked about my recovery, my new life, the years they had missed. I learned how they had honored me through charity work, believing my death had saved Lillian's life. No one blamed anyone. There was nothing simple enough to blame. We were all survivors of the same mistake. I kept thinking, Lillian said quietly, resting a hand over her chest. That part of you stayed with me. I smiled faintly. Maybe it did. Healing didn't arrive dramatically. It came in small agreements. Weekly phone calls, honest conversations, therapy suggested by hospital counselors, something my father surprisingly agreed to without argument. We learned slowly how to speak without assumptions, how to listen without fear. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, they visited my apartment for the first time. Rain tapped softly against the windows while coffee brewed in the kitchen. My mother brought pastries. My father insisted on fixing a loose cabinet hinge I hadn't noticed. Lillian laughed when my neighbor's dog barked endlessly down the hall. Normal moments, fragile but real. At one point, my father set plates on the table and paused. "One more?" he asked quietly. I nodded. 4 plates. Not a replacement for lost years. Not perfection. But a beginning we chose together. I used to believe survival meant moving forward alone. Now I understood something different. Sometimes survival means allowing people back into your life, not because the past disappears, but because the future deserves another chance to exist. And as we sat together eating breakfast, sunlight breaking through the clouds outside, I realized something I hadn't felt since before the accident. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a daughter again. If this journey stayed with you until the end, it's probably because some stories remind us that healing isn't about undoing the past. It's about deciding who gets to walk with us next,